are at a point where you're going to look at number 3, which is where you're going to determine how your voice, your style, how certain lines or parts of your story are going to be influenced or inspired by mentor texts. And all this means mentor text. Well, you know what a mentor is probably. A mentor is somebody who guides you as you're learning something new usually. So a mentor text is a text, okay? In your case, it's going to be probably your independent reading book that you're reading right now. That is going to be your mentor. So you're going to look at that and figure out how that's going to inspire you to become a better writer. Because a big part of the reason that we read creative pieces is to inspire our writing. And plus, just reading a lot naturally helps people become better writers. But this is, what you would do with anything. So if you're playing a sport, you might watch professional athletes to see what they do and kind of break that down and absorb that information so that you can put it into your own craft. Musicians might listen to specific musicians and kind of feel inspired by a specific musician, and that might make its way into how you play your instrument or sing or whatever. So it's the same idea. So that's what we're going to work on today. And remember, if you are shooting for the top, if you're shooting for a 5, which I hope you all are, because why not, on the proficiency scale for this specific target, what we're looking for is all of this, but ultimately the additional part is that you can show a direct correlation or relationship between part of your draft and the specific part of the mentor text that inspired it. So I'm going to show you exactly how to do that today. So I'm reading a couple different things right now. I'm reading to my daughter, I'm reading Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So as I was reading, I got to the part which I've read this before. I'm reading it again, so it makes it a little bit easier for me to pay attention to things like this perhaps. But this is the part where the troll was in the school, if you're familiar with the story. And this was the description of the troll that was given on page 174. It was a horrible sight, and the sorcerer's, it was a horrible sight. 12 feet tall, its skin was a dull granite gray, its great lumpy body like a boulder, with its small bald head perched on top like a coconut. It had short legs, thick as tree trunks, with flat, horny feet. The smell coming from it was incredible. It was holding a huge wooden club which dragged along the floor because its arms were so long. So this is basically just a very detailed description of the troll. So this kind of caught my attention because in my story, I'm writing about when I lost my dog. And my first paragraph for this exercise, I decided that this is all that I had so far of my story. The first sentence, which is that my first child was my dog, Chomp Chomp. So I thought, well, this would be a good place for me to insert a really good description, just like J.K. Rowling does of this troll, except I'm going to be describing my dog. My first child was my dog, Chomp Chomp. So let's decide how I can move forward from here. And I'm writing this as I'm recording, so coming off the top of my head. So I'm not going to worry about it being perfect. I'm just going to worry about emulating or copying, not copying isn't a good word, sort of imitating the things about this description that J.K. Rowling wrote that I like. So I need to look at it and determine what I like about this. So she starts by kind of telling you how you should feel about the troll before she describes him. She says it's a horrible sight. So I'm going to start kind of like that. But I'm talking about my dog, who is certainly not a horrible sight. He's an adorable sight. So I might say, Chomp Chomp is, in a word, adorable. So I'm going to start by going ahead and telling my reader how he looks right away. And then I'm going to describe it in detail, because that's kind of what she does. She says it's a horrible sight, and then she describes in great detail, from head to toe, the horrible sight. And she even gets later on into the smell. And then kind of like a behavior that he was holding this huge wooden club. So I'm going to do the same thing, I think. I'm going to start by just describing what he looks like. I might describe a different sensory thing. It could be a smell, or maybe I'll decide just to describe how he sounds, since he's a dog and he makes noise. And then maybe I'll get on to a behavior. So I'm going to kind of follow her format. That's what I mean by being inspired by my mentor text. So let's describe why he's adorable. Let's say he stalks around on his short little legs. I'm looking at him right now. Let's say which struggled to hold up his little tank of a body. His Chompy, how should I describe you? His kinky yet surprisingly soft white fur stands up all over his stout little body and round little head. Giving him the appearance of a little teddy bear that came to life just to play with you. Oh, a little typo I'll fix. Remember, if you get that red squiggly line, just double click, which means put both of your fingers on your Chromebook trackpad and push down, and then the options will pop up for you and you can select the correct word. Alright, so that's a little brief description. I'm going to add a couple more things. His long furry tail wags ceaselessly, which means all the time, constantly. I'll just leave it at that for now. Sometimes it's nice to have like some long sentences and some short sentences. So the sentence before it is pretty long, so it's kind of nice sometimes to have like a little short sentence after that. Anyway, alright, so I've described what he looks like. Let's cut to should we talk about his smell or should we talk about something else like the way he sounds? Let's say his bark is shockingly loud for his size. Oops. And then the last thing that J.K. Rowling said about the troll was about him holding a club. So we could actually, in the same sentence, do the same thing. His bark is shockingly loud for his size. And he uses it frequently. We'll just leave it at that for now. So later on in the revision step, I might go in here and make changes, but I'm just going to do a quick read through. Every time I write like a paragraph or so, I stop and go back and reread it. That's my process. You're going to find as you're writing in the writing process that you will frequently stop and reread and reread and reread what you've written and make little tweaks. That's a really good practice. That's to go back to an analogy I've made before. If you were cooking, you want to taste as you go, so you know what you need to add as you're cooking. That's the same idea when you're writing. You stop and taste what you're writing. So my first child was my dog, Chomp Chomp. Chomp Chomp is, in a word, adorable. He stalks around on his short little legs, which struggle to hold up his little tank of a body. His kinky yet surprisingly soft white fur stands up all over his stout little body and round little head, giving him the appearance of a little teddy bear that came to life just to play with you. His long furry tail wags ceaselessly. His bark is shockingly loud for his size, and he uses it frequently. One thing I noticed as I read it out loud, and that's why reading things out loud is a really good practice, I use the word little probably too much. I've got it here, 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 and that's too much. So that's one reason it's a really good idea to read things out loud. But that's okay, I'm going to leave it for now because I'm going to get that in revision and editing later on. But you can see how I used a mentor text to inspire how I was going to approach my writing. I'm going to give you one more, much shorter example. This is the book I'm reading for myself. It's called Between Shades of Grey, which I'm going to say right now has absolutely nothing to do with the 50 Shades of Grey thing, so don't be thinking that. Between Shades of Grey is a really good book about World War II from the experience of a Lithuanian who was taken away from her home by the Soviet secret police. So it's kind of a historical fiction. And this is just one line that really caught my attention as I was reading. So obviously the character's going through a lot of hardships. And when she experienced a great disappointment, she said, "Now my heart sank into my stomach where the bile began to chew it." So I just really like this play on words. You've heard of people probably saying that their heart sank or their stomach sank, and they don't mean literally. But she is also like extremely hungry in this book. She's starving because she's not being fed. So she talks about how when her heart sinks, it sinks all the way into her stomach, and bile is like stomach acid begins to chew it because she's starving. And I just thought that was such a genius line. And I thought, well, obviously not nearly to the degree that she's experiencing a hardship or disappointment, but I can relate it to my story because my story is all about when I lost my dog. So I thought I might try to write a line that somehow kind of calls back to this line in this story that I'm reading. So I could say, when I realized Chomp Chomp was missing, and really his name should be hyphenated. When I realized Chomp Chomp was missing, what could I say? I could say, well, one thing I know is that it made me cry. First of all, I love my dog, if you couldn't tell, so I'm emotional anyway, but this all happened right after I had a baby, so I was extremely emotional anyway. So I could say, when I realized Chomp Chomp was missing, a lot of times people describe when they're crying as a lump in their throat. I don't know if you've heard that term before. So I might say, a lump formed in my throat and and grew so large I couldn't breathe. Yeah, a lump formed in my throat and grew so large I couldn't breathe. So you don't literally get a lump in your throat when you're about to cry, although it really kind of feels like it, and it couldn't stop you from breathing. Just like it's not really possible for your heart to sink into your stomach and then your stomach to start eating your heart. So see how I'm sort of, I'm inspired by what Ruta Septis, which is the author's name, how she wrote that. I'm inspired by it and I use that as inspiration, but I'm not copying it. I'm not even talking about the same organs or anything like that, but you can see a connection between the two. So that's what you're wanting to do. In fact, here's a list to help you as you try to do this yourself. So as you're reading your independent reading book, I just want you to bookmark descriptions and stylistic choices that the author makes that appeal to you. And there's different ways to do this. You can throw some sticky notes in there, and I have some. If you need to borrow some from me, let me know. Sticky notes, that's all I did as I was reading. I knew that I was going to be teaching this lesson and writing my own piece about losing my dog. So as I read, I just kept that in mind, what I was writing myself and anything that I thought I could use. And I did wind up noting some pages that I wound up not using, and that's okay. So just sticky note anything that appeals to you. If you don't like the sticky note system, you can just keep a log. Make sure you get the page numbers though, because especially if you want to get full credit, a number 5 on the scale, you need to be able to show me specifically out of your book what inspired it, just like I showed you in this presentation, as well as showing me, okay, well that inspired this part. So you need to be able to show me a connection. So if you don't want to sticky note it and you prefer to write it on a separate sheet of paper or keep it in a Google Doc, that's fine. Just make sure that you get the lines and the page numbers. So after you get those lines down, decide what about it appeals to you. Is it the structure of a description like it was for me with Harry Potter? Or is it like just the style of the play on words? Whatever it is, you need to decide what about that part that you marked appeals to you. And then use that to inspire how you write the parts of your own story. Remember, you cannot copy or steal ideas from an author. That's bad form. But you can use it to inspire you. So if you get confused as you start to do that yourself, just go back and you can rewatch how I did that on this video. And you can skip through this video. You don't have to watch the whole thing. But make sure that you're clear on that. And of course, as always, record questions that you have and ask me during conferencing, and I can help you with this process.